Social media. All around the world, people who have mobile devices are likely to have a presence on social media. However, data reveals a link between social media use and a surge in health issues. Anxiety and depression are two such issues. Research suggests that social media use may be correlated to lower self-control. Lower self-control often causes poor or addictive behavior. Social media has been described to be more addictive than tobacco and alcohol. People may rely on social media as a form of escapism and for mood-modifying effects. These are similar to the reasons people become dependent on addictive substances. Surveys about social media show that a surprising number of teenagers have been subjected to cyberbullying. Cyberbullies can easily remain anonymous. They are accountable to no one, so they use social media to target victims and spread rumors. This has become so common that the term keyboard warrior has been coined. A keyboard warrior's agenda is to write abusive posts while staying hidden. The effects of cyberbullying can be traumatic. There are other negative effects of social media's popularity. People sometimes use social networking platforms to show their best selves. A recent social media trend is to upload and broadcast video clips to share a piece of one's life. However, instead of feeling accepted and validated, people end up comparing their lives with other people. This trap of comparing lives may lead to symptoms of depression. Social media use has also been linked to feelings of social isolation. The more people use social media, the more they realize that their digital friends may not actually be real friends. This feeling of isolation may cause a person to experience extreme loneliness. We see social media used in the personal and professional lives of those around us. It's apparent that it's here to stay. Therefore, it's necessary to consider the importance of educating people on how to use social media effectively and safely.
Enhanced weathering. Air pollution is not only a contributor to global warming, but also to poor air quality. It can have negative effects on human health. Carbon dioxide is the leading pollutant, with billions of metric tons emitted annually by the burning of fossil fuels. Burning less fossil fuels is the obvious way to reduce carbon dioxide. Unfortunately, a tremendous number of people rely on fossil fuels for heating, electricity, and transport. This has prompted scientists to look for different approaches to reducing carbon dioxide. Weathering is when chemical compounds in the atmosphere react with chemical compounds on the planet's surface. The weathering of rocks refers to the chemical breakdown of rocks. This occurs when rain, which contains carbon from the atmosphere, comes in contact with rocks. The carbon is captured and embedded in the rocks. This is a natural process and can substantially remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. However, this process is extremely slow. Scientists have been studying ways to integrate this process. They have discovered a technique to speed up weathering. They call this enhanced weathering. Certain types of rock, such as olivine, are crushed into a fine powder. The powder is spread over a large land surface to be rained on. This process decreases the time of natural weathering by maximizing the rock's exposure to carbon. There are skeptics, however. Some people are uncertain about the effects of enhanced weathering. Some even object to this approach. Rocks such as olivine may contain toxic substances that can contribute to polluting the planet. Also, grinding rocks produces dust. The dust can be harmful to human health. Moreover, the process of crushing and transporting rock may cause additional carbon emissions. Although more data needs to be collected, scientists have not completely rejected enhanced weathering. They are hopeful that it will enable the safe removal of atmospheric carbon dioxide. Scientists are working together to help improve air quality, combat global warming, and heal our planet.
Les Chambon-sur-Lignon. During World War II, thousands of foreign-born and French Jews had to flee from the Nazis, who were capturing them and taking them to the death camps. A small number of individuals throughout Europe were involved in saving the Jews, but in Les Chambon-sur-Lignon, a small remote village in south-central France, the entire community joined in the rescue efforts. Most of the villagers of Les Chambon-sur-Lignon were descendants of the Huguenots. The Huguenots were Protestants who once endured persecution in Catholic France. They never wanted to forget their own history. A pastor named André Trocmé saw the Jews as the Bible's people. He began hiding them. Hundreds of families aligned themselves with his parish and agreed to help. The residents cooperated in several ways. They risked their lives by hiding the Jews from Nazi patrols. They offered shelter in their own homes, barns, and public buildings, such as orphanages and schools. They forged identification papers to enable Jews to escape. They guided a number of refugees across the border by rail and on foot. The refugees had to travel through underground tunnels and mountain passages to the safety of Switzerland, which was a neutral country during the war. The village received support from people in other places as well. There was an extensive underground network of individuals throughout the region who helped along the way. Even when the Germans were outraged and raided the village and detained people thought to be helping the Jews, the villagers defied authorities. They did not betray each other either. They continued to protect the refugee and by doing so were able to continue to provide an exit to safety. The inhabitants provided refuge for an estimated 3,000 to 5,000 Jews. Today, the village of Les Chambon-sur-Lignon is seen as an exceptional example of a collective rescue effort during a truly dark time.
The digital economy is soaring. There are over 7 million jobs in the computer science and technology industries in the United States alone. Yet, there is still a major gender gap when it comes to women in tech. These women face many challenges, as seen in a quit rate of 41%. So, what can be done to close this gender gap? How can we ensure fair pay and equal opportunities? First, women need to be inspired and motivated to enter the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM, as well as computer science. According to statistics, 74% of young women express interest in STEM subjects and computer science. However, women hold only 18% of undergraduate computer science degrees and 26% of tech jobs. Early education must convey technology as a tool that can be applied to real life to solve problems. Many young women are put off because they view the technology sector to be too male-dominated. Women lack prominent roles, holding only a mere 5% of tech leadership positions. Therefore, women who are already in tech positions must act as mentors and endorse other women in these fields. They can play a huge role for young women by giving them encouragement, support, and guidance. These women can help attract and retain more women and therefore create a level playing field. However, it is not just the women in tech who must be vocal. Men working in the tech industry have a responsibility to listen to women and foster a comfortable work culture. The leaders in the industry have the power to create new opportunities and promote the inclusion of women to close this gender gap. There must be a systematic approach from schools to workplaces, including the motivation of young women to study STEM and computer science. Women must provide support and mentorship, and men must listen to and encourage women. If we continue to empower women in the tech sector, it will be good for everyone.
Impressionism. Impressionism is a movement that began in France in the late 19th century. It is considered to be the first modern art movement, as it was seen as a departure from other art. This is because it violated the established rules of academic painting. Unlike realistic academic paintings, Impressionist paintings are characterized by the depiction of light on objects. The artists aim to capture the light rather than the details in order to show an impression of time. This distinctive quality is achieved by using two key techniques. The first is a technique called impasto. Impasto is an Italian word that means mixture. In painting, impasto describes short, thick strokes. This technique allows the artist to control the reflection and movement of light on the canvas. The artist can modify the width and direction of the paint strokes to convey texture and give the painting a three-dimensional quality. Also, the speed and strength of the strokes can convey the artist's perception of the subject. The second technique is optical mixing. This involves the use of broken colors. In other words, instead of the traditional practice of mixing an array of colors on a palette, artists paint different colors side by side. Doing this adds texture and plays on light, and it creates the illusion of different colors. Another difference between Impressionist paintings and traditional paintings is the subject matter. During that time period, the accepted subjects were historical or literary themes. They were often based on religious or mythological subjects. Impressionists, on the other hand, preferred landscapes and contemporary life. They often painted outdoors, using the sunlight to depict a brighter style. Even though photography was starting to become popular, Impressionists avoided representing reality. They demonstrated their individualism by playing with color and blurring the line between the subject and the background. In the mid-19th century, the middle class in Paris saw rapid growth. The city saw an increase in cafes, cinemas, parks, and boutiques. Impressionists captured the daily lives of the middle class, which appealed to the wider public, and eventually led to the acceptance of Impressionism into the art world.
April 25th is Anzac Day, Australia's National Day of Commemoration. It is a day to remember the Australian soldiers who served and sacrificed their lives for their country. Anzac Day marks the anniversary of when the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, ANZAC, mobilized and landed on Turkey's Gallipoli Peninsula. It was just 9 months after the outbreak of World War I. The objective of this joint mission was for the troops to capture what is now present-day Istanbul. At the time, Istanbul was the capital of the Ottoman Empire and an ally of Germany. The campaign involved fierce fighting for months and ended without victory at the end of 1915. Over 8,000 Australian soldiers lost their lives. By the end of the war, 60,000 were killed and over 150,000 were wounded or taken prisoner. Thus, April 25th became a day of remembrance. However, Anzac Day now goes beyond the day of the Gallipoli landing. Now, it is a day to pay tribute to all Australians who served and died in any military operation. Every year, on April 25th at 5:30 a.m., formal commemorative services are held across the nation. This is usually referred to as the dawn service. The service includes praying, laying wreaths of red poppies, observing a period of silence, and singing the national anthem. During the day, former servicemen and women march through major cities. People wear sprigs of rosemary on their coats to symbolize remembering and remembrance. Rosemary has particular significance because it grows wild across the Gallipoli Peninsula. Anzac Day was originally set to commemorate the anniversary of the landing in Gallipoli, but it is now a day to celebrate the courage, determination, and perseverance of the Australians, who served and died in all wars and peacekeeping operations. Anzac Day is also a day of unity, as people share their sorrow for the many lives lost in wars.
Endangered languages. Most people know about endangered plants and animals. However, not everyone is aware of the extent to which many languages are in danger of extinction. Currently, there are almost 500 languages that are officially endangered. According to statistics, 95% of the world's population only speak 6% of the existing 7,000 languages. This means that only 6% speak all the other languages. Some languages have fewer than a dozen speakers. There are several reasons why languages become extinct. A key reason is the influence of the dominant languages. Generally, dominant languages are associated with higher social status and education. People who move to urban areas are forced to learn the dominant language. In most cases, the children do not learn their native language. In addition, many rural communities give up their linguistic heritage in an attempt to assimilate into mainstream culture. For example, India has lost 220 of 780 languages in the last 50 years. Once Hindi was recognized as the official language of India, the number of Hindi speakers increased from 260 million to over 420 million. Another reason languages may cease to exist is that the people who speak an endangered language may be in physical danger, such as from war or genocide. Many languages of the indigenous people in the Americas are either extinct or endangered for this very reason. Natural disasters and disease can also wipe out entire populations. When the people in a village of Papua New Guinea were hit by a devastating earthquake, all were wiped out. The language they spoke, Malol, was wiped out with them. Languages represent cultures and show diversity. Losing a language equates to losing all cultural references expressed through linguistic means. The broader global community suffers because of the diminishing cultural and linguistic diversity. Therefore, efforts need to be made to preserve and revive endangered languages before they disappear forever.
The ketogenic diet. Many diets come and go. One diet that has gained a significant following is the ketogenic diet. This diet is a low-carbohydrate, moderate protein, high-fat diet. Many swear by it, claiming that it has improved their overall health. Known health benefits are weight loss, diabetes management, increased mental focus and energy, and epilepsy control. An average person's main energy source is glucose. When food that is high in carbohydrates is consumed, the body produces glucose. Since glucose is used for energy, fats are not needed and are therefore stored. By lowering the intake of carbohydrates and increasing fat intake, the body goes into a metabolic state known as ketosis. This is when the liver breaks down fats and produces ketones, which then become the main energy source. The body then becomes extremely efficient at burning fat for energy. Therefore, the goal of a ketogenic diet is to keep your body in this state. In a ketogenic diet, carbs are strictly limited and should come from vegetables, nuts, and dairy. Refined carbs, such as wheat, starch, and fruit, are not allowed. This means pasta, bread, potatoes, and beans, as well as all fruit, are to be avoided. The majority of meals should include meat, fatty fish, eggs, leafy greens, dairy, and healthy oils, such as olive oil, coconut oil, and avocado. A ketogenic diet has a lot of positive benefit. However, there are side effects. Some include cramping, constipation, heart palpitations, and reduced physical performance. As a precaution, you should always check with your doctor before you start any form of dieting. In summary, eating more fat, a moderate amount of protein, and few carbohydrates will put your body into ketosis. Your body will use up the fat as energy. This diet can be a powerful tool for good health and weight loss.
A keen young bachelor had finished his studies at the university. He had completed his studies in the minimum time and was about to start looking for a job. As soon as he had received his diploma, he thought that he was the smartest person in town. "I excel at everything I study," he said, bragging about his knowledge. "I've mastered psychology. I even understand the great theoretical teachings of science, such as relativity. There is nothing that I don't know. Whether it's the movements of celestial objects like planets and stars, or how to use the power of radioactive substances, I know everything." But actually, there was something the bachelor did not know. Although his analytic abilities were great, he failed to notice he was missing something very important in his life. One day, while walking through town, the bachelor witnessed a collision between two cars. Both drivers appeared to be injured, but the scholar only stood and watched. He thought to himself, "Those idiots should have been more alert. They really must not be very competent." He never thought the drivers needed help. "Please, help me," said the female driver in a weak voice. "Help me too," said the male driver. "I'm hurt and can't move." Suddenly the bachelor realized he was the only person in the area near the accident. He quit thinking and ran to help the drivers using his medical knowledge. He carefully helped them out of their vehicles and then called an ambulance. The drivers were saved, and furthermore, the bachelor felt the best he had in his entire life. Studying sociology and geology didn't give him this wonderful feeling. It was the act of helping others, not his cognitive skills, that gave him this great feeling. He had learned an important lesson. He learned that intellect isn't everything. Being helpful is just as important. Having only a brain is not enough, he thought. An integral part of being alive is also having a heart.
The corrupt administrator. Mr. Watson is an administrator at a big factory that made different kinds of merchandise. During a meeting at the company's headquarters, his bosses said they wanted the factory to make more money. "If the factory makes more money, then you will too," his boss, Mr. Johnson, told him. It was a great incentive. Mr. Watson had always wanted to be as affluent as his bosses. Mr. Watson returned to the factory and started making changes. However, most of his changes were not very nice, and some were not legitimate. First, he fired all his employees. Then, he automated the entire factory. Machines now made everything, and his employees had no jobs. Next, he bribed some corrupt senators into legislating special subsidies for the factory. Finally, instead of paying a company to dispose of the factory's rubbish properly, he violated the law by throwing it into the river to save money. At first, all the changes to the factory's infrastructure created more revenue, but soon, many stores could no longer sell the factory's goods at retail. It seemed that the machines couldn't make products as well as the workers. The customers were disappointed with the factory's merchandise. There were other problems, too. The workers had told their friends and family to stop buying the factory's goods. Officials discovered the factory's rubbish in the river, and when they audited the company, they discovered that Mr. Watson had manipulated the law in order to get more money. All transactions with Mr. Watson's factory stopped. The factory lost money, and Mr. Watson lost his job. He realized his mistakes too late. He had tried to become rich by saving money any way possible, but the cheapest way is not always the best.
A famous accident. One of the greatest medical discoveries happened by accident. In his haste to go on vacation, Alexander Fleming had left his laboratory in a mess. The essence of his ongoing work involved a type of bacteria. An infection caused by the bacteria was often terminal, and he was looking for a remedy. He had left the bacteria out while he was away. When he returned from vacation, he found that his lab was covered in fungus. He started cleaning up the mess. While he was cleaning, he had an impulse to examine the fungus. He saw that whenever the fungus was in close proximity to the bacteria died. Although he was a messy scientist, his experiments were precise. He thought that there might be some significance to the fungus. He immediately commenced an experiment to assess what had happened to the bacteria. It had either died by accident or the fungus had killed it. The subsequent tests proved it was the latter reason. What he found astonished him. The fungus actually inhibited the growth of the bad bacteria. All this time, he had been looking for a synthetic material to kill the bacteria. Instead, a common fungus did the job. He knew that something in the fungus had killed the bacteria. His next step was to find those molecules that had done it. When he found them, he extracted them and put them into a pill. The drug proved to be very effective. It also worked against other types of harmful bacteria. The discovery received a lot of publicity. Soon after, the new drug was being used all over the world. Because of the success, the scientist was able to develop even more fabulous drugs to help people. His accidental discovery changed the world and helped save many people's lives.
Beethoven's gift. Beethoven was a great composer of classical music in the 1800s. Many biographies have been written that narrate his dominance in the music world. But do you know what really makes him special? Even though millions of people got to hear his multiple masterpieces, he never did. Beethoven wrote his best pieces after he had gone completely deaf. His partiality toward classical music developed when he was very young. He wasn't interested in anything else as a child. When he was 5, he learned how to play the piano. From then on, nothing could stop his passion for writing and playing music. When Beethoven was 20, he began to lose his hearing. He got acute, spontaneous pains in his ears. His hearing kept getting worse over time. It was inevitable that he would eventually lose it altogether. It was very hard for him to keep writing music. He lost the virtue of patience, and he became notorious for his aggression. Still, he never stopped trying. His passion for music compelled him to keep performing, even after he was deaf. He couldn't hear himself play, but he knew that his creations sounded gorgeous. His final concert was held and was to be his finest. He gave the musicians a cue, and they began to play. He directed the concert with all his heart. He couldn't hear the music, but he said that he could feel it. Overall, the performance was one of the finest in history. When it was over, he turned to the crowd. They clapped and cheered wildly. In that beautiful moment, the applause boosted his emotions, and he began to cry. In 1827, he suffered from lead poisoning. He didn't survive the sickness, but his music did, because great music never dies. Even though Beethoven is gone, his legacy will live on forever.
A day without sight. On Friday afternoon, Sam's teacher had a special assignment. Next week, we'll be studying humanitarian efforts around the world since the time of the Renaissance, including those to help the blind, she said. Over the weekend, I want each of you to undertake the difficult task of wearing a blindfold for an entire day. The premise of this experiment is that it will help you understand what it's like to be blind, she said. Sam was a skeptic. He really didn't think the assignment would be too challenging. On Saturday morning, Sam took a piece of cloth and tied it around his head to cover his eyes. Then he went into the kitchen for breakfast. He heard the voices of his parents and brothers, but couldn't specify where each voice was coming from. He thought about how important hearing is for blind people. "Could you pass me the newspaper, please?" he asked. Just then he remembered he couldn't see the words on the page. He wondered if newspapers were ever made for the blind. After finishing breakfast, his brothers asked him to play soccer. As he followed them, he accidentally walked into the bike rack. He also found that he couldn't play soccer. He wouldn't be able to coordinate his actions without being able to see. Without his optic senses, he had no spatial awareness. Furthermore, he couldn't easily do normal activities because he had to make sure he was safe first. He sat on the lawn. Suddenly he realized that, although he couldn't see, his other senses worked perfectly fine. In fact, he began to realize new and different aspects of common objects. For example, he took a flower bud and felt it with his finger. He realized for the first time that it seemed to be covered with wax. His hypothesis about being blind was disproved. The informative experiment had a strong effect on him. It showed him sight was an asset that should be appreciated and taught him to appreciate and give credit to the talents of blind people.
The history of parachutes. Scientists who study archaeology say that there may be some evidence of prehistoric parachutes. But the first written history of the device comes from China, about 2,100 years ago. Scientists cite an ancient book that describes parachutes. However, there is no archaeological evidence that proves that an actual parachute was ever made. Later, people from northern Africa and Italy also had ideas about a similar invention. In fact, a Leonardo da Vinci's drawing corresponds closely with the modern parachute design. In 1783, French scientist Sébastien Lenormand invented the first modern parachute. Lenormand brainstormed with a team of other scientists to come up with a way to help people jump safely out of burning buildings. He thought the solution was to give people an object to restrict their speed while they fell toward the ground. Many people thought that he was up to some kind of fraud, but Lenormand had a lot of integrity. His budget was limited, so he first tested his theory by using 2 umbrellas. He jumped out of a tree and found that the umbrellas worked. Next, he refined his invention. Rather than using umbrellas, he made a large parachute. Finally, he jumped off a tall building on a French estate and landed safely in the courtyard. Lenormand's work gave another man an idea. Jean-Pierre Blanchard had a different outlook than Lenormand. He was a hot air balloon addict. He was one of the first people to ride in a hot air balloon powered by hydrogen gas. He was a proponent of using the parachutes to exit from hot air balloons. Starting in 1785, he used his dog to show that animals could land safely from hot air balloons by using parachutes. Then, in 1793, he was faced with a chaotic experience. The hot air balloon he was riding in burst and started to fall. He was forced to use a parachute himself, and much to his relief, it saved his life.
The bond between humans and computers is becoming more intimate than ever before. Scientists are now even putting microchips inside people's bodies. They are made up of compressed electrical circuits that can detect and record data about the body. They are tiny, but they hold the equivalent amount of data as some computers. A microchip is put to use inside a person with a simple procedure. First, a doctor must put data about the patient onto a chip. Input about the person's age, race, gender, and medical history is stored on the chip. The second phase of the process involves putting it in the person's skin. The doctor pinches a piece of skin and cuts a tiny hole with a tool shaped like a spiral. The chip is inserted, and the skin is allowed to heal. Lastly, it begins sending data to the database. Microchips scan the patient's body to record what is happening on the quantum level. They can find problems with the person's metabolism and organs. They can also detect viral infections. They can find the aggregate number of immune and infected cells and present the results in a ratio. They can even tell doctors what type of antibiotic to give to the patient. To recover the chip's data, the doctor uses a special magnet that copies it. This way, the doctor can put the information from the chip onto a computer. Then they can find out exactly what is wrong with the person. The idea of putting chips in people is still very new. However, it is now becoming more prevalent. Scientists and doctors are hopeful about the future uses of microchips. Someday, all new babies might get a microchip soon after they are born. Doctors will be able to know about any problems from the very beginning. It is obvious that medicine and computers complement each other well.
The new BioCo. Jack got a new job at a biotechnology company called BioCo. BioCo manufactured drugs to treat diabetes and high cholesterol. Jack's job was to use a tiny mechanism to get nectar from flowers. The nectar was a main ingredient in the drugs. Jack liked his job, and he thought that BioCo was a caring company. However, Jack soon learned that the company wasn't as kind as he first thought. BioCo's motto was, "Make the earth a better place." However, this motto was deceptive. The company actually did a number of really bad things to the environment. The company produced a lot of smog and harmful acid. BioCo poured the acid in a nearby river, which killed the fish. The waste from the factory also caused erosion of the riverbanks. After a few weeks at the new job, Jack saw all the bad things BioCo was doing. He had always had strong ethics, and he knew he had to do something. One day, while the BioCo workers were eating in the cafeteria, Jack stood up and gave a speech. He said, "My fellow co-workers, I know you have all seen the evil things our company is doing. I have a notion that we can fix them if we form a coalition. We can go to the administration and tell them we'll quit if they don't eliminate the problems. They'll have no choice but to listen to us." Jack explained what they were to do. His coworkers liked his explicit plan. They went to the administrative offices and demanded that BioCo stop damaging the environment, or they all would quit. One supervisor said to them, "Thank you for being straightforward about this issue. Since I can't afford to lose all of you workers, I guess we'll just have to fix things." Jack, his supervisor, and his coworkers spent the next month designing a new framework for the company. They cleaned up the acid from the river and minimized the amount of air pollution the company released. At last, under this new regime, the company's motto was more suitable.
The resourceful landlord. A kind landlord was afraid that he would lose his apartment building. He needed to make some mandatory repairs to the old building, or his tenants would have to leave by the end of the month. Without tenants to lease the rooms, the landlord would be unable to pay his mortgage. He'd be bankrupt, and the bank would take his building. He got quotes for the repairs, but he didn't have the money whereby he could employ the personnel needed to make them. It would seem like he did not want to conform to the city's codes before the forthcoming inspection. He had requested an extension, but it was denied by the city. He held a meeting with his tenants and explained the unfortunate situation. "If the building does not meet the appropriate standards for safety and hygiene," he said, "the city will expel everyone." The tenants were all sad for the kind old man. "Maybe we can help," said the hairdresser who lived on the first floor. The other tenants agreed. One tenant had worked for the city's utilities. He knew a lot about plumbing, so that's how he helped. Another tenant was a carpenter. He mended the holes in the floor and walls. Others cleaned the building from top to bottom so that it was more hygienic. They even furnished some of the apartments with new beds, dressers, and chairs. When they were done, all of the people went into their apartment, and the landlord went home to rest. When the deadline of the inspection arrived, the apartment building was hygienic and safe. The landlord couldn't believe it. His old building now looked like one of the nicest buildings in town. The building passed its inspection, and the landlord and the tenants had a big party. "Thank you all so much," the landlord said during the party. "I could never have done it by myself, but by working together, we now all have a beautiful place to live."
The first organ transplant. In 1954, a man named Richard was dying of kidney disease. He wouldn't survive for long unless he got a new kidney right away. Richard's twin brother, Ronald, was willing to donate one of his kidneys to his dying brother. At the time, however, no doctor had ever performed a successful internal organ transplant. The idea of taking an organ out of one person and putting it into another was just a fantasy. But the brothers decided to be brave and found a doctor who could make organ transplants a reality. Since Richard and Ronald were twins, their heredity was identical. They had the exact same biological traits. Even their kidneys were identical at the cellular level. Therefore, Ronald's working kidney could be substituted for Richard's bad one. Richard's body could adapt to the new organ if the operation was done correctly. The twins went to Dr. Murray, who was a pioneer of new surgical methods. His dynamic team of surgeons performed the transplant. Dr. Murray made sure his surgeons followed a rigid sequence of directions so that no mistakes were made. First, they made a minimal cut in Richard's side and removed the bad kidney. Then, they made another small cut in Ronald's side, removed his kidney, and transferred it into Richard's body. Finally, they sewed up the respective cuts. The entire operation only took about 1 hour. After the surgery, it was clear that both brothers were going to be okay. The operation was confirmed a success. Richard's new kidney worked great. Doctors prescribed medicine for the pain caused by the surgery. Since Richard was still weak, he used physical therapy to rebuild his strength. At last, Richard's transition into a healthy, happy person was complete. Dr. Murray became a hero in the medical world. His success gave other doctors confidence to try organ transplants themselves. Now, doctors perform similar life-saving transplants and surgeries every day.
Among the multitude of stars in the universe, there are a couple that are of great importance to people. The Sun, of course, is one of them. The other is known as Polaris, the North Star. Polaris is special because it is the only star that always appears to be in the same place in the sky. Therefore, Polaris is a great compass. When people in the northern hemisphere of Earth look toward Polaris, they can be certain that they are facing north. The permanence of Polaris in the north sky has helped countless people find their destinations. Before the invention of modern navigation tools, mariners relied on Polaris. Their technique was to look for Polaris to figure out their place at sea. They figured out the angle between the star and the horizon to determine their latitude. As long as the equations weren't erroneous, the results were very reliable. Polaris also let sailors determine north, south, east, and west. By knowing directions and their location, mariners could easily navigate their ships. To those who sail at night, wild storms and dark clouds were more than nuisances. They could disrupt entire journeys by blocking the view of Polaris. A captain could err and make an inadvertent turn, deviating from the correct course. The ship could become stranded at sea, and the frantic captain would have no way to improvise to get the ship back on the right course. The mariners' fears wouldn't be soothed until the clouds cleared and Polaris came back into view. Even today, sailors sometimes choose to navigate by using Polaris on clear nights. It's not difficult to differentiate Polaris from other stars. The Big Dipper, which is well known in astrology, appears to revolve around Polaris. The handle of the Big Dipper always points to the North Star. When people get lost, it's comforting to know that their problems can be solved by looking at the sky.
Dressed to excess. If you traveled back in time to the 1700s in Europe, you would laugh when you saw how the aristocracy dressed. Soon you'd realize, though, that the aristocrats of Europe were very serious about their appearance. Their appearance was one way of denoting their rank in the social hierarchy. The predominant style in women's attire was enormous dresses. They were often 3 times larger than the wearer. Ladies even used pads to enlarge the appearance of their hips and shoulders. On the other extreme, the aristocratic women made their waists appear extremely thin. It took several maids stretching fabric and pulling straps in order to get a lady's waist to the proper thinness. These ladies could barely breathe and often fainted. Pale skin was also a craze, yet this too was done in excess. One could not simply be pale. Instead, she needed to look as if she was ill. In order to look paler, ladies actually cut themselves daily so they would bleed. The hairstyles, however, were the most striking part of women's fashion. These stood a meter high on the ladies' heads. The columns of hair were a ridiculous tangle of wigs, jewels, flowers, and even stuffed birds. Their partners, the men, were similarly absurd. Today, they would probably seem very feminine. Reputable men wore wigs of long, curly hair. Their shoes had large soles or high heels so that they could walk high above the filth on the streets. Furthermore, just like the ladies, the men wore lipstick and painted their cheeks red. Their clothes were brightly colored, often purple and pink. They were made from the finest of fabrics and decorated with jewels and lace. The men competed with one another to see who wore the more expensive clothes, for the clothing signified wealth and status. Both men and women spent huge amounts of money and time on how they looked, but it was part of the protocol they were expected to follow. Though such vanity would seem strange today, 300 years from now, the fashions of our time might also seem completely ridiculous.
Amazing Komodo dragons. Once a British Gazette had an unusual story. Scientists at a zoo made a major discovery about Komodo dragons. Komodo dragons are giant lizards that grow up to 2.5 meters long. A female lizard at the zoo had babies. However, it had never been around a male lizard in its entire life. After the scientists publicized their discovery, many people thought it was not true, but it was true. It was discovered that female Komodo dragons can have babies without the help of their male counterparts. This contradicts what scientists know about how most animals have babies. In most cases, there are many things that can obstruct this type of reproduction. For example, adult males and females carry different genes needed to make an embryo. If the genes are homogeneous, the babies are weaker and have genetic problems. Over time, the weakened species dies out completely. This makes it necessary for the male to be involved. However, scientists verified that when Komodo babies are born, their genes aren't the exact same genes as their mother. Also, they are devoid of any genetic problems. Scientists theorize that Komodo dragons develop the ability because it helps the species avoid extinction. If a volcano erupts, lava can kill all of the Komodo dragons on an island. However, as long as an individual female avoids death, she can prolong the survival of the species. Luckily, Komodo dragons are vigorous swimmers, so the surviving female can plunge into the ocean and swim to another island. When she comes ashore, she can reproduce by herself. Over time, the genes within the population diverge. Then the small population increases. Finally, there is a surplus of lizards on one island. Scientists think that this may be how the lizards survived and took over all of the islands in that area.
Greek Magical Papyri. The Greek Magical Papyri is a collection of writing about magic. After it was found in the Egyptian desert, it took experts years to interpret it. The text was written in at least 3 different ancient languages. After many years, experts realized the document contained a number of spells that varied greatly in scope. The most common types of magic in the collection dealt with healing illnesses like pneumonia. Some spells also gave advice for treating people with mental illnesses, such as those who became psychotic. Some spells utilized unusual things, like crocodile dung, but botany was an important part of the magic. Many healing spells gave instructions on how to use herbs and plants that were believed to be helpful. For example, in order to cure arthritis, the book says that the magician should build a beautiful altar. Then, he should crush different types of herbs and place them on top of it. At dusk, he is supposed to say a spell so the gods would be gratified. Other parts of the collection describe how to hone one's psychic abilities and how to give credible descriptions of the future. Often, the book advised people how to use different objects to tell the future, including tea leaves. Also, one part of the book tells what different dreams might mean. It gives advice for using dreams to tell the future. A small part of the book, however, has more sinister motives than the rest. It is meant to cause strife and deception. For example, one tells how to give someone warts, while another will make all of the victim's farm animals die. However, if someone's farm animals died as a result of a curse, he could ask a magician to perform magic that makes the deceased recover and come back to life.
There are many animals with dangerous bites in the world, but which one is the worst? People assume snakes are the most dangerous. Some would say that the elusive short-tailed mamushi has the worst bite. The snake only goes into homes in pursuit of pests, such as mice. Otherwise, it stays in the fields, where it's dangerous to people who search for food there. Usually, it is reluctant to attack humans, but if someone stuns it by accidentally stepping on it, it bites to protect itself. At first, the effects of the bite may seem minor and negligible because it doesn't cause a lot of bleeding. However, after a few moments, the venom induces paralysis in the area where the individual was bitten. Furthermore, the venom can also interfere with breathing. If the person doesn't go to the doctor, they are susceptible to kidney deterioration. Others would argue that tigers have the worst bite. Mother tigers are inseparable from their babies and seem to be the gentlest creatures when they are around their young. However, if the babies are threatened, the mother tiger's savage nature prevails to ensure their safety. With strong jaws and the ability to move quickly, the tiger can kill someone with one bite. That's because it always tries to bite an important artery when it attacks. If the artery is ruptured, the victim will bleed to death. In the mainstream, animal bites are seen as the most dangerous, but some scientists think this idea is invalid. In fact, the most dangerous bite might be the human bite. When scientists magnify the contents in human saliva, they found about 300 different microbes in it. A human bite can be dangerous if the bacteria enters the body through a cut, which can make people very sick. Furthermore, most people don't realize how serious a human bite can be, so they don't go to the doctor right away. This gives the wound a chance to get infected and cause more problems.
The Lydian King. King Croesus was once one of the richest kings in the world. He ruled over Lydia, an ancient empire located near modern-day Turkey, and controlled a valuable commodity, gold. Many people were very envious of him. One day, a messenger disclosed some interesting news. Political unrest in Persia had weakened the empire. Before then, the Persians had taken over many countries. Many leaders were scared of the Persian conquest, but King Croesus understood the dynamics of war better than most. He decided that it would be a good time to try to beat the Persians while they were weak. He advocated starting a war, but nobody shared his wishes. Then, he asked a wise member of the Senate who was visiting from Athens. He didn't say whether he should attack the Persians or not. He only indicated that the king's good luck wouldn't last. Finally, King Croesus sent a messenger to communicate with the oracle, a special lady who could see the future. The messenger gave the oracle jugs of wine and baskets of lentils in order to make her happy. When the messenger came back, he was in a festive mood. "What was the oracle's prophecy?" asked King Croesus. The messenger responded, "She said that if you attack Persia, you will destroy a great empire." The news filled Croesus with happiness. After hearing the oracle's prophecy, many civilians enrolled in the Lydian army. The king marshaled his troops and prepared them for a war with Persia. Their morale was high because they were sure they would win. Soon, King Croesus authorized an attack against the Persians. However, the Persian army was still very strong. After a few months of fighting, it was obvious that the oracle's prophecy had come true, albeit not in the expected way. By attacking the Persians, King Croesus had destroyed a great empire, his own. King Croesus should have considered the ambiguous advice more carefully.
Smallpox was once the most deadly widespread disease in the world. During the 1800s, more than 20 million people got the disease every year. Of those, nearly half died. At the onset of smallpox, people suffered from high fevers, headaches, vomiting, and aching muscles. Yet the worst symptom of all was the irritation over the entire body. Those who survived the disease were often rendered blind or left with gross scars on their face and body. Today, however, cases of smallpox are very rare due to the work of many countries during the late 1900s. This federation of countries collaborated to completely destroy smallpox. Early in the century, wealthy countries in Europe and North America had developed a substance that made the body immune to smallpox. They had required all their citizens to get this vaccine to fight the disease. Hence, the people of these countries no longer had to worry about smallpox. However, many of the needy people in poorer parts of the world still suffered from the disease. Their countries could not afford the vaccine, nor supply enough doctors to curb the spread of smallpox. In 1950, the wealthier countries of the world vowed to rid the world of the disease. They worked out a coherent strategy to do this. They pledged to supply the vaccine to any country that could not afford it. Scientists compiled lists of areas where the disease still thrived. Then doctors diagnosed people who had the disease in these areas. They enacted laws that prohibited people with smallpox from mixing with those who did not. In this way, they could not transmit the disease to others. Then the doctors gave all of them the vaccine. It took a long time and a lot of work, But nearly 30 years later, on December 9, 1979, a group of scientists certified that smallpox had been successfully stopped. The humane efforts of people from all over the world had accomplished a great task and transformed people's lives.
Epidemic in Zimbabwe. In August of 2008, a deadly cholera epidemic manifested itself in Zimbabwe. A severe health hazard caused the outbreak. There was a lack of clean drinking water in the overcrowded urban areas. Garbage and chemicals got into the public water supplies and contaminated them. Since people did not have access to other sources, they had to drink the dirty water. The outbreak spread rapidly and infected almost 16,000 people. The illness caused extreme pain in people's intestines. It also caused a deficiency of important fluids in sick people's bodies. Without the proper fluids and minerals, their bodies stopped working correctly. People were unable to digest food properly or replenish their lost nutrients. Without viable treatment, they would die. It was imperative to reverse the situation. However, the government of Zimbabwe was unable to provide help to its people. The government didn't have a plan to stop the spread of cholera. In addition, the country was too poor to get clean water or medication for the sick. The people seemed to be doomed. Luckily, many other countries recognized the need to contain the outbreak. Dozens of voluntary practitioners from Britain, France, the United States, and other countries went to Zimbabwe to treat the disease. Through the provision of sterile drinking water and medication, people finally got the treatment they badly needed. The compassionate doctors were able to save the lives of thousands. By January of 2009, the epidemic was almost completely contained. Today, the Zimbabwean government is investing in measures to avoid future epidemics and placing an emphasis on prevention. They are cleaning up the water supply and making changes to reduce health hazards. The system used to filter water is being upgraded. The government now administers the water supply plants and makes sure that they adhere to strict safety guidelines. Hopefully, future instances of cholera will be treated before they start deadly epidemics.
Now, if a person who lived 200 years ago was treated for a seizure today, they would be surprised by the treatment's novelty. That's because doctors in the 1800s were influenced more by very old medical beliefs than by science. Rather than thinking the brain caused seizures, people in the 1800s still thought they were the result of strange forces. This belief was founded on an ideology that equated seizures with the work of evil spirits. Others felt that the seizures had a cosmic or lunar cause. They believed that the cycles of the moon and planets could make someone have a seizure. During a session to treat a patient who had seizures, doctors would force the patient to invoke the grace of the Almighty. They thought if the patient did this, then the patient would rid themselves of the evil spirits causing the seizures. The advent of modern psychiatry occurred during the 1800s. At that time, people who suffered from seizures were placed in psychiatric hospitals. They were treated like they were insane. However, none of the outmoded treatments worked. It wasn't until the late 1850s that the causes of seizures were understood. We know today that these causes involve the brain. Misfired signals from the brain cause a jerking reflex in the body. These usually occur when someone is very tired. Once the causes of seizures were known, definitive treatments were developed. Today, treatments range from taking pills to having surgery. Treatment is personalized according to the type of seizure the patient has. Even today, some people are unsure about seizures. Their most common mistake is thinking that a person having a seizure will swallow their tongue. They often shove some utensil in the person's mouth. However, this doesn't help. The utensil often blocks the airway and prevents the person from inhaling. Yet most of the public no longer fear people who have seizures. Instead, they can now help and comfort a person if they have a seizure.
Last year, Eric constructed one of the world's strangest houses in the icy landscape of northern Sweden. He called it the Ice House. a house made entirely of ice and snow. All of the beds, chairs, tables, and walls are cold, hard sculptures of ice. A group of architects and volunteers from all over the world traveled to the site of the ice house and began its construction. The multicultural group journeyed through storms and freezing temperatures to reach the site. Once the builders arrived, there was an interchange of ideas, tasks were assigned, and tools were allocated to each worker. An expert was selected to oversee the building process to make sure there was no discord between the workers. Once a plan was generated, the community of volunteers got right to work. The design was very unique. The builders couldn't copy the design of normal houses. The first step was to build the walls and ceiling. The builders used a metal frame to help them build the structure. After the ice was in place, the frame was removed. The builders then created furniture and art pieces. Designs were carved into each item. One worker carved big, wavy lines, and another made tiny, clockwise concentric circles. Finally, the workers carved small cavities in the roof and inserted colored lights. When the work was finished, the beautiful house was a visual masterpiece and was ready for a resident to enjoy. Living in the ice house is an experience like no other. Eric stores his belongings in an ice cupboard and lays out a sleeping bag on his ice bed. At dinner, he dines on a delicious salad with crisp toppings. And for the main course, he enjoys appetizing fish caught from a nearby river. The fish are pierced with icicles and served on ice plates. After dinner, he gets ready for a cold night. The omission of heaters can be too much for his visitors sometimes. Luckily, there are warm rooms nearby, as a courtesy to people who get too cold.
Overpopulation is a big problem in every region of the world today. Too many people are crammed into cities and towns around the globe. Earth's population is about 6.5 billion people. This number is growing every day. Notwithstanding improvements in birth control, in just 50 years, the population will be almost 9 billion. Many people worry that the Earth won't have enough resources to support so many people. One major reason for this is that wasting resources and polluting have become habitual behaviors. Industrial output results in polluting the air with dangerous fumes. Also, cars and machines waste important natural resources, like oil and water. It's possible that the Earth may become so damaged that it cannot support a large population of humans. Another issue is the lack of useful land for cultivating crops. Even today, many people subsist on mere scraps of food and little water. In 50 years, many experts worry that huge numbers of people will starve to death. So what is being done to prepare for the future? People are realizing they can no longer justify their wasteful behavior or defer action to fix it. Many car companies already have patents for very efficient cars. Such cars waste no resources and produce no pollution. A conversion to clean cars means that petroleum can be saved for the future. In addition, the environmental sectors of many governments are setting strict rules for industries that pollute too much. If companies do not keep to these standards, they are penalized with higher taxes. In some cases, their operations might be suspended altogether. Food is also an issue that is being tackled. Many countries are now subscribing to the point of view that immediate action is needed. They are determining ways to export goods to people in need so that no one goes hungry. Experts will continue to come up with ideas for the future, and a synthesis of these ideas will help to support the growing population.
100 plays. Over 2,000 years ago, Chinese farmers had a problem. Even though they were very industrious, the weather became too cold outside to plant rice. So, what did they do? Since they had so much free time during the long, cold winters, the inventive farmers were very resourceful and started performing tricks to entertain themselves. They used their farm tools and anything they could find to make their tricks more spectacular and full of energy. They even twisted their bodies into abnormal shapes and performed awesome jumps. Over time, They became great acrobats, and their art form came to be known as hundred plays. Hundred plays involves doing many kinds of tricks. For example, in Mandarin-speaking parts of China, performers do the lion dance. They wear costumes and mimic the animal's movements. Early performers also did tricks on ropes and vines that were high above the ground. Even though the acrobats' fluid movements may have looked easy, they took a lot of practice and required great technical skill. Learning hundred plays is a communal event. A veteran of the acrobatic arts usually teaches younger people in the village. They spend a lot of time rehearsing. The young performers also learn an old philosophy. The teachings help them harmonize the sensory aspects of acrobatics with the mental aspects. In other words, it teaches them to use their physical and mental strength together. Since the art has its origins with poor farmers, rich people used to scorn the acrobats. They thought acrobats were villains who just wanted to trick them. But later, their misguided opinions changed. Acrobats came to be respected in Chinese society. They were invited to perform in metropolitan areas as well as in small villages, and they performed for important people. Arts advocacy groups convinced the government to support Chinese acrobatics. As a result, there is now a statute that made several villages the center of training future acrobats.